What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with got you?
You wake up each day and the only thing that matters is the next one. And if you don't feel that way, you're on the other side of the thin line that delineates between losers and winners. And I have always felt like coaches have had such great impact on my life. All I want to do, other than my family, all I want to do is continue to hopefully positively impact these young men so that they make more of themselves than maybe they would have had they not been a part of my life.
Bill Tierney is the head men's lacrosse coach at the University of Denver and one of collegiate lacrosse's legendary coaches. In 2015, Tierney was named USILA Division I National Coach of the Year while capturing his NCAA-record 7th national championship, becoming the first coach to win national championships in charge of 2 different programs. In his 36 years of coaching, Tierney has amassed a resume that includes 7 NCAA championships, 9 NCAA Final appearances, 15 championship weekend appearances, 23 quarterfinal appearances, and 14 Ivy League championships. There are few coaches in the world who have a more impressive resume, and on this episode, Coach Tierney shares his coaching lessons, how to develop talent, and why adaptability and taking on new challenges is one of the most important life skills.
Coach Tierney, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Sean. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's a true honor. As you know, just the amount of respect I have for you. I know you're humble, but I do think you're the greatest lacrosse coach of all time. So this is just an absolute honor for me. But I thought a really fun place to start would be around a quote your son Trevor said. And Trevor, obviously legendary goalie for some of your national championships team. And this was after the 2001 overtime win against Syracuse. And Trevor said, "He makes life so miserable in practice that the games are fun. And we know there will never be as much pressure in a game as there is in practice." And I would love to just hear your thoughts on that quote by him.
Yeah, it's funny. Just on that quote, as you know, it's, when you get to these Final Fours, and I've been so blessed in my career, and certainly the highlight of that career has been that 2001 championship when Trevor and Brendan were both playing for us at Princeton. And so we had been beaten pretty well by Syracuse during the year, and just came into that, had a great semifinal against Hopkins, and then got into that. And it was interesting because Trevor played a great game, probably would have been the MVP had we not given back then, as you remember, when you had a 1-goal lead, you had to keep the ball in your offensive box in the last 2 minutes of the game. And Trevor made a save and pitched it out to one of our short sticks. And for some unknown reason, I mean, this kid was a 4-year starter, just a great kid. He just ran through the corner of the box, which turned it over to Syracuse. And of course, they had Michael Powell at the time. So Michael scores a goal with 19 seconds left to tie it up. And then BJ Prager scores the winner in overtime. So, so when you get to that point, you're up on a dais. It's the highlight of being a lacrosse coach and a lacrosse player. You're at this Final Four, and there's, probably 100 news reporters and media people, and they get to fire all questions at you. And when you win, and I've been on both sides, so I understand when you win, it kind of doesn't matter what they ask you. You'll answer anything. And so one of the reporters said to Trevor, that you usually bring a couple of players, and one of the reporters said to Trevor, how is it that you guys always seem to come up big in these tight games? And that's when he looked down at me. It's kind of funny. He was at one end and I was at the other, and he looked down at me and he goes, "Can I tell him?" And going back to that feeling of, I don't care what you say today. I said, yeah, tell him whatever you want. And that's when he said that, I make life pretty miserable for the guys during the week. And so the games seem a little bit easier. But it's kind of a quote that I've always kept in the back of my mind as sometimes as you get a little older, you start to think, maybe there's a chance I can go to heaven if I start redeeming myself for all those bad sins, and being somewhat abusive to my own sons and their teammates. So sometimes when I start thinking, you got to lighten up a little bit, kids are different. I go back to that quote and go, it's our job to challenge young men and bring them to the highest level they can possibly achieve.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working with your son, Brendan, at Nike for a few years, and some of the stories he shared with me for some of the great comments coming out of Coach Tierney's mouth. It's pretty humorous. I am wondering, though, about that pressure, and I'm always intrigued about that balance behind adding too much pressure to an environment and not having enough there to get the most out of your players. How did you battle that throughout your career?
Yeah, I think one of the keys is as a coach and probably as a leader in a business and all that stuff is to make sure you're absorbing more pressure than the people who work for you or your players, because there's so many of them. They're fragile right now. I'm dealing with 18 to 22 year old young men that have so many things going on in their lives right now. Social media is as destructive a thing as you can get, besides war. It's just it's fun. The kids enjoy it, but it can be tough on young people. And and I think in this time of the COVID and certainly the financial crises that we're all going through, the universities, the decisions about athletics, and then you throw into the fact that most of these young people have never really experienced failure, because every time they've failed at something, even when they were 10 years old in Little League Baseball, it was the umpire's fault, or it was the other coach's fault, or his coach's fault. And so I think it's really important to get them to understand pressure and get them to understand how losing builds you and small failures can make you stronger. As I told my team yesterday, we're just starting into somewhat of lacrosse looking practices, because before this we were working in 10-man cohorts, and you play the game long enough with 10 people on a field, there's not a heck of a lot you can do. So so now we're into it and trying to explain to 15 freshmen that kind of watch the older guys and go, whoa, those guys are really good. And, is to get them to understand it. And, no matter whether it's a loss and then a win, or a sickness or an injury and then health, or whatever it might be, or a bad day to a good day, that the idea is to understand it's always one step back, two steps forward if you really work hard. And eventually you get to the end of that journey, or you achieve what you want to achieve. So I do think putting pressure on young people, maybe in ways that they don't even realize it's pressure, or they might even feel it with things like keeping score in drills, getting something done in a certain amount of time. Yesterday we made them run a half mile, and they had to finish it in 2.5 minutes. And not everybody can do that, but putting that pressure on them to make sure you made it so the other guys don't have to run more, that's a unique little set of pressures. It's because we all know, Sean, you played enough sports and lacrosse. That scoreboard is foreboding. You can play the greatest game in your life, and you can walk off the field and maybe have 3 or 4 goals, but if your team loses, you feel like it's the end of the world. And so I think trying to put those little pressures on, and then trying to reward little steps forward is just a way to kind of make it a yin and yang kind of step up the ladder and hope that they can get there.
What happened to the guys who didn't make the half mile in 2.5 minutes yesterday?
Well, I slowed the clock down a little bit for one of our goalies, because he's such a great kid. There's a reason he's a goalie, but most of them made it anyway. So we were pretty happy with practice anyway, so it was okay.
I was talking to one of your former players, and they said this was the day after you guys won the championship and his career ended. He said, I threw away my running shoes and never was going to go running again.
Exactly. Well, we have a funny situation right now. The young man on our team, a freshman on our team, whose dad was my first recruit at Princeton. Jack Tortolani's here with us at Denver now, and his dad, Justin Tortolani, was on a first recruit. He was a Manhasset kid on Long Island, and this thing goes full circle. And so when I tell that story to people, some people say, "Well, take the hint. That means you're getting really old, so get the heck out." Or I look at it and say, "Wow, what a wonderful opportunity." I've had a few kids now where I've coached their dad and them, and it's fun to see that the similar traits that Jack and has with his dad and his mom, who were both great athletes at Princeton. So there are unique, cool things that happen, and it's kind of we told them yesterday, because we call it the Monday Mile. Next week we'll start the whole mile, but I told him, I said, Jack, you just became more related to your dad than you ever were, because I started this back in his freshman year at Princeton in 1988. So all those players, I'm sure there's a ton of them with stories a lot worse than I threw away my running shoes. But they're all interconnected, and that's one of the things that makes me most proud of still being around.
Yeah, don't worry. That's not where the story ended. So we'll keep that between us. But I am wondering. You mentioned this coming full circle. What do you think's changed the most about your coaching style over the years?
I think that the key is not so much to do it my way or it's the highway. It's more of the balance between keeping those old school, making young men sacrifice with little things. It's maintaining those things. Just for instance, still in this day, our guys still have to get haircuts. We don't allow facial hair. We wear shirts and ties on the road when we're traveling. We travel over 30,000 miles a year with our team. Every time we go on a trip, I have to have somebody who's not related to our team say something positive about one of our players, or maybe a young man helped an elderly woman with her luggage, or it's just something little. Maybe someone in a hotel saying that our guys were the nicest guys they've ever been around, and things like that to just make you feel like, even though it's old school, make you feel like you're helping young men be aware of what's going on around them. One thing I always talk about is the 5 people I admire most in my life all have a similar trait, and then that is that they cannot, or could not, because a couple of them passed now, could not walk past a piece of paper on the ground without picking it up. And I think it's something very simple, but it sends a good message. And then as far as me changing goes, I think the one thing I've learned, and thank God for David Metzbauer putting me up with me for 20 years, and now Matt Brown putting up with me for 12 years, is that I've learned to give away a little bit. It doesn't have to be my drill. It doesn't have to be my way. It doesn't have to be the way we did it, 30 years ago when we won our first championship at Princeton. What you learn is that if your assistants and your players are happy, if they're having a little fun, if they're as long as they're working hard and they see the light at the end of the tunnel, you don't have to be so myopic to do things your way.
When did you learn that you could allow those assistant coaches to have a little bit more say in what they did?
Well, I think I learned it out of necessity at Princeton with Metzi, because there was only 2 of us. I mean, we had second assistant coaches back then, and we had a great person. Bryce Chase was a volunteer coach at Princeton for like 50 years, but Bryce was an attorney, so he didn't come to meetings or anything. And for 14 straight years, from 88 to 2002, before Sean Nadalin came to me, we had our second assistants only lasted 1 year. Now, I don't know what that says about me, but out of necessity, it was kind of Metzi ran the offense, I ran the defense, and that was it. The good thing about us was we saw eye to eye in recruiting. Recruiting was pretty cut and dry for us at Princeton for a bunch of reasons. Number one, there wasn't that many teams competing for championships, and number 2, you had a finite group of young men who could get into the place. So I think I gave a lot away to Metzi, but it was out of necessity, and we both saw things eye to eye. I think it really came to fruition when I came here to Denver, and my son Trevor was my associate head coach for our first 5 years or 6 years, and Matt Brown was only 25, 26 years old, and his way of running the offense was so different. I had never coached a Canadian kid. Matt was Canadian. Trevor and I did the defense, and he did the goalies, and it was really Trevor who's probably, as a as my own son has probably given me more advice in my life than anybody else, he and my other son, Brendan, that said, Dad, just trust this guy, Matt Brown. And so we have, and slowly but surely over the last 10 or 11 years, Matt has, when Trevor stepped away to get his master's degree in developmental psychology. And so Brownie became our associate head coach, and I hired John, first I hired Dylan Sheridan, who's my son-in-law, who's now in Ohio with my daughter, Brian. And but then I hired John Orson. And what I learned is that it's not, I saw a quote on Twitter one time when we gave up a bunch of goals, and somebody said Tierney can't even coach his own defense anymore. And it kind of went, I don't listen to that stuff very much, but it's kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about here. And what I realized is, along with that idea of the drills and giving up some game planning and things like that, is that there's so many different ways to skin this cat in the game of lacrosse that it became more fun for me, actually, Sean. I'd rather win it back all those years at Princeton. I'd rather win a game 9-7. And, now we'd rather win a game 15-13, even though we had those great Hubbard, Hessen, Massey teams in 96, 97, 98 that scored 15, 16 goals a game. It's just kind of, I've been able to change through my own introspection, I guess is the word, but just to say, don't make yourself miserable trying to do everything the same way all the time. Let's, when we moved to Denver, people asked, why'd you move out there? And it was really a very selfish decision that thankfully my wife, Helen, who's been with me for 44 years, said, yeah, let's do it. It's a new adventure. And I think that allowed me to kind of open up and say, let's do this maybe in a different way.
I don't want to pick out something that's not there, but you mentioned a minute ago, maybe it's just the introspection and you looking deep. Was that actually like a big process for you in understanding more about yourself and then the people you're surrounding yourself with?
Sure. I think so, but I'm not a big reader. So it's not something that all of a sudden one day, something came through from a John Wooden book. I've read Wooden's books and I've read some other, books like that. I'm not a big quote guy, but I have some quotes, so it's kind of been back and forth. And I think it's just the reality. As Brownie got more and more confident with the fact that I trusted him, and became more and more confident that in our second year, due to his offense, we make the Final Four in our second year together, with really a mishmash group of people with some great players. Mark Matthews was a heck of a player, and Cam Flint and Jeremy Noble and those guys, Chase Carrero, all those great guys we had. But I think as Matt got more and more confident, it allowed me to kind of open those doors and allowed me to say to him, what do you want to do in practice today? Or, what else do you think we should do? Or why don't you take over the ride and clearing game? You seem to have some good ideas with that. And honestly, Sean, it became a relief to me to not have everything, every little mistake piled on a decision I might have made on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable the amount that trust opens up for other people's confidence. And I'd love to tackle that in a minute, but I would love to know for you, where did you develop that self-confidence for yourself?
Well, I think it goes back to my situations in coaching. When you first started this thing, when I moved from high school lacrosse on Long Island to RIT in Rochester, I had an assistant coach, but he showed up at 3:00 and left at 5. And so I was washing the laundry, lining fields. This is back in the early 80s when you did these things, doing all the recruiting. And so, so I had to only trust me at that point. And we did pretty well. But then when I went to Hopkins, what I realized as going from a head coach to an assistant coach back then under Don Zimmerman, who's a phenomenal head coach, was that I had to learn how to be a teammate in the coaching ranks, because back then there were no limits on your staff. We had 10 coaches on our Hopkins staff my first few years there. And I had to learn from the other side. Hey, and those days when Zim would say to me, what do you think? Or who do you think we should put in? Or what's your strategy for this defensive strategy for this game? I learned that it made me feel so good. Like you said earlier, it made me feel like I was somewhat important in this program that had 100 years of history and all that other great stuff. I really wasn't that important in it, but the fact that he allowed me to be somewhat important in that reminded me that when I went to Princeton, that especially 2 years later when I got Metsi, that I knew what it felt like to be trusted. And when you know what it feels like to be trusted, it's much easier for you to entrust others in the thing, including players. At Hopkins, I had to be the head soccer coach. I didn't know anything about soccer. I had been a football coach on Long Island and actually achieved my lifetime goal of being my high school's head football coach, and then left that after 1 year to go up to RIT. But when I got the job at Hopkins, it was they had one winning year in 50 years of soccer. So I figured out, if I can talk my way past Bob Scott, who you may remember is a great old AD at Hopkins, if I can get my way past him, I'll work it out with the kids. And the soccer kids there, Hopkins is a unique school in that it's Division I only in lacrosse. It's Division III and everything else. So all the kids we had on the soccer team were pre-med, engineers, really bright kids. And I'll never forget, I got them in the first meeting and I said, listen, fellas, I'm going to be clear with you guys. I don't know a thing about soccer. And I'm going to trust you guys to help me through that. Now, I'll recruit. I'll get us better players. I'll work your tails off. I will give great pregame speeches. I'll put us in position to win. But you got to help me along too. And those kids, it was like, it's like lifting 1,000-pound weight off their shoulders because they had heard this guy who doesn't know anything about soccer is going to be our coach. And so they grasped that and they went with that. And the first year we were 7-9, and then the next 2 years we were 14-3, and the third year we made it to the NCAA tournament. And that helped me a great deal, not only to learn to trust my coaches, but trust my players as well. Because in lacrosse, you play once a week. It's kind of like football. You jam everything down their throat during the week, as we alluded to before. But still, it's still free flowing enough that, even if they don't remember the play perfectly, it's up to them and their skills and their unique decisions that they make to be successful.
Yeah, trust is a pretty remarkable thing. It makes me think of something early in my business career. I had a manager. We were in an important meeting, a meeting I really didn't have the right to be in. And they asked him a very difficult question. And he posed it and he said, you know what? I think Sean can answer this one better than I can. And just that little moment, I'm young 20s, and just having to stand up and talk in front of a room like that, I think that forever changed my overall self-confidence. And then that allowed me to step up in so many other roles. So I love hearing these stories with the sports analogies. You became legendary, essentially, for being able to turn around programs. So did it all start with Hopkins soccer for you?
Oh, no, it was way before that. My first, when I got out of college, I had a good friend, Buddy, who became my good friend, Buddy Krumenacker. I had coached some junior high football and some junior high basketball, but Buddy hired me to be his assistant coach, lacrosse coach at Great Neck South High School. And we were together for 1 year. And it wasn't a great year, but I learned a lot from Buddy about, how to be a head coach and things like that. And then he left to go be the head football coach or an assistant football coach at his old high school, at Farmingdale High School, and the assistant lacrosse coach. At the time, you may remember, but the people are kind of amazed at this, but the first NLL indoor league, the box league, was in you won't remember this, but people might, 1974 and 75. And I was lucky to be able to play in that. So in 75, I didn't coach because I was playing pro lacrosse on Long Island. And And so in 1976, the Great Neck South job opened again, and they had been not very good for a lot of years. And in fact, my first year we were 4-14, then we were 14-5 or something like that. But my fourth year there, Great Neck South at the high schools, right off the Long Island Expressway, they used to, I don't know if they still do, but they used to put a plaque up under each sports name on the wall of their gym. And it would have a carved wood, like in lacrosse, it might be a lacrosse stick, or, whatever, a football or soccer ball or whatever. And to this day, in 1979, we won our league championship and lost really closely to Cold Spring Harbor. Ended up winning the county championship that year. But so I kind of got this blueprint for that. And then we went on to Levittown Memorial, which was my high school, who had a good lacrosse program. But we were, I had Larry Quinn as my goalie, so we went 36-6 over those 2 years, and then to RIT, where Ray Rostan, who's my best friend and best man in my wedding, he was at RIT and had turned that around, but he went to Ithaca College, and I kind of, got us picked up, where he started and got us to the NCAA tournament there. And then the Hopkins soccer. So you're right. I kind of made up until Princeton, I never was in a job for more than 3 years. And so when I got to Princeton and was offered the Hopkins job in 1990, it would have been 3 years. But that's when I kind of felt like I had found a home. So I decided to stay. And that 3 years lasted for 22. So, so I guess I just, and that resurrected itself when I came here to Denver. I was better at turning programs around than I guess I was for keeping them, although we had continued to do well at Princeton. I just felt like it was a new challenge, and they had done okay here, but, we promised them a national championship and we were able to get that in 6 years here. So I guess I had some sort of blueprint or somebody looking down on me, or a lot of luck to be able to turn these programs around.
Yeah, when you took the job at Denver, leaving Princeton, so I grew up just outside of Princeton. I mean, your games every Saturday, that's what I was going to. And I was at Carolina at the time. But I mean, I got amped up. It's like, hell yeah, Coach Tierney, like taking on this new challenge, like greatest coach of all time. And you're like, no, I'm not satisfied. I'm going to test my boundaries and limits again. And that makes me think about something you mentioned a minute ago. You were talking about your lifetime goal was to become your high school football coach. Once you accomplished that, what did your goals change to at that point?
I think by then, Sean, I had fallen in love with lacrosse. I didn't play lacrosse till I got to college at Cortland, and didn't become a half decent player until I played in that pro league and then beyond that. And so I had become passionate about lacrosse. Now, clearly, I wanted to be this head football coach, and planned on being there for a long, long time. And then when Ray Ostan called me and said, I'm leaving RIT to go to Ithaca. Would you be interested? It's kind of like, wow, we had just been in a county championship on Long Island in lacrosse at Levittown, again with Larry Quinn. And Ray had recruited a couple of my guys, Eddie Purcell and Tommy Sill, to go up to RIT. So I just felt like at the time, I can be here. I lived in Levittown most of my life. I can be here for the rest of my life. And it was fine. I loved what I was doing. I was teaching. And but what a cool challenge to be a college lacrosse coach. And then it was actually just like the Denver job. I didn't give it a lot of thought. I just went with it. And it was, turned out to be a good move.
Yeah, it seems like you're able to trust your gut there. You mentioned you kind of had this blueprint, and I know that's kind of an overarching term. I'm wondering, though, if you could complete this sentence. If I didn't do this every day of my coaching career, I wouldn't be nearly the coach I am today.
If I didn't remind myself that you're one loss away from being fired. I think there's a, it's across my office, so I can't see it very well, but there's a Bill Parcells quote that was in Sports Illustrated. And basically what he says is that you wake up each day and the only thing that matters is the next one. And if you don't feel that way, you're on the other side of the thin line that delineates between losers and winners. And I have always felt like coaches have had such great impact on my life. All I want to do, other than my family, all I want to do is continue to hopefully positively impact these young men so that they make more of themselves than maybe they would have had they not been a part of my life.
Yeah, I mean, just knowing the stories from many of your players, and then even just the impact. I never played for you, and just the amount of impact you had on me is pretty remarkable. So
I've had a lot of guys turn me down for Carolina, so that's okay. I get it.
Well, you mentioned the coaches and mentors who've had such an impact. So I would love for you to talk about Freddy Smith and who he is and what type of impact he had on you.
Yeah. So when I got to Hopkins in August of 1987, I didn't know much about Hopkins. In fact, going back to May of 87, I had just finished our last year at RIT. I knew I was going to Hopkins by then. And so we had sold our house, and so we moved down to Maryland in the summer. And I knew how to take this soccer thing on. So whatever. But so I didn't get to coach with Zim too much in the fall unless he had like a Sunday practice. And back then, fall lacrosse isn't what it is now. It was more of getting the guys together, having fun, helping the freshmen get along, stuff like that. So fast forward to the end of soccer season, and Zim saying to me, "Hey, every Tuesday we go with Freddy to lunch down to the in Baltimore. It's I don't know if it's still there, but they called it the Market. It's kind of like the one in Philly, right? Just this craziness goes on at lunchtime." And so I was like, "Oh, who's Freddy?" And he said, "You'll get to know." And so every Tuesday, Freddy would pick Zim and I up. We'd go down to the Market, and it was crazy because we'd either have chicken livers or raw meat sandwiches with horseradish on them. I'm like, I look back now and go, what was I thinking, But I was 30 years old. Who cared, right? Or 35 years old. And but Freddy Smith had such an impact on me. He took guys like Dave Petramala, John DiTomaso, Steve Mitchell, all these guys that were tough guys, some of the greatest lacrosse players in lacrosse history, much less Hopkins history. And he just had this quiet way of impacting these guys and demanding discipline of them and making sure that they did things in such a correct manner that I was just in awe of this man. And so my first 2 years at Hopkins, I was actually entitled the first assistant, right? I was the one who was in the office. I was the one who helped Zim recruit, and stuff like that. But in essence, Freddy, who was in his 60s at the time, was the defensive coordinator. And I just kind of learned and hung around with him and warmed up goalies and stuff. Well, by the time our third year came around, we had won the national championship in 85, fell short in 86 to Carolina, in the first Final Four at Delaware. And then 87 came back and upset Maryland and upset Cornell to win the championship. But when Freddy had that fall, Freddy developed lung cancer. And so I became the defensive coordinator. And, it was pretty monumental in my mind to get this thing done with all these great players and stuff. And we ended up, due to the help of, Jerry Pfeiffer and Zim and all those other guys that were on it, we end up winning the national championship. But after the semifinal, Freddy was really sick. I mean, we drove him up. It was at Rutgers. And after the semifinal, we had beaten Maryland, who had beaten us during the year. And they took Freddy home because it wasn't that far a ride. And we called him up and the next day and said, "Are you coming up for the championship?" And the Hopkins-Maryland rivalry is a pretty big one. So he said, no, I've seen all I need to see. And then we won the championship the next day against Cornell and called Freddy up. And I remember going back home and Zim and I go to the hospital and we give blood and for Fred, try to help Freddy, and he sees the cotton, Band-Aid on my arm, and he goes, he was just such a good man. He was so thankful for every little thing you did, and yet taught me so much. And I still say to this day, he taught me how more than anybody else in this game and in all the years I've been a part of it. And then one final story, actually in '85, we were playing Syracuse in the national championship game, and that was before Final Fours, and it was up at Brown, and Syracuse had a great team. They had Brad Kotz and all these great players, and so I hadn't said much that year, but we had a crease attackman that people were back then. Offenses were pretty simple. They would take the crease attackman off the crease, and they'd get the ball to him, his guy, and and they would try to beat him because he was really a great crease defenseman. And so I kind of sheepishly raised my hand in this meeting as we're preparing for Syracuse, and everybody's looking like, oh, he's going to say something. And I said, why don't we just, every time they take him out on the wing, why don't we just yell out zone and get into a fake zone? And then when he throws the ball, we'll go back to man-to-man. And everybody else looking at me like, go back to sleep. You don't know what you're talking about. And Freddy, that was the first time we talked before about trust, right? Freddy, I'll never forget, stood up at the table and he said, it's about time we start listening to this guy. And we did it. And it was, it didn't win us the game. We won 11-4. Syracuse was up like 3-0 in the first 5 minutes. And I think we won 11-4 or 11-5. But it was that trust that allowed me to move on and always worship Freddy. When Freddy passed away, it was a tough time in my life.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing those absolutely remarkable stories. I'm wondering about that moment where Freddy put that trust in you. Was that when you started to cultivate what later became the Princeton defense?
No, actually, it was a little different. You mean meeting with Freddy?
I guess just that.
So when before I went to Princeton, when I was coaching high school lacrosse and coaching at RIT, we actually did this defense that was, if you could look historically in it, was actually very much like the Princeton defense, but it was all the rules were the opposite, if you can imagine. So what we did at RIT was we drove everybody to the middle of the field, which is kind of dangerous, and I didn't know what I was talking about at the time. But as soon as you saw that guy's back, we had a call where the guy covering the ball, he would turn him to the inside of the field. But as soon as the guy behind him saw that guy's back, he would get his stick in front of him and try to turn him back. And we would double team from behind and circulate the defense into it. Well, then I get to Hopkins and I got this Freddie Smith, who's just a phenomenal man. And he starts telling me about look, it wasn't as intricate as the Princeton defense, I guess you'd say, but look, it's pretty simple. If you keep a guy away from the middle of the field as he goes down the alley, his angle decreases. Because at Hopkins, we didn't slide very much. We had such great players. We would slide if we needed to. And then he had this thing where if the attackman had it, he would, we called it Delaware, meant don't slide. And the other one was a coma, which was a come across the crease slide, which we all, people know about. And that was kind of it. But when I got to Princeton, my first 2 years, the mistake I made there then was when we went 2-13 and 6-8 was I tried to do the things that Hopkins was doing, and we didn't have the talent to do it. So then I kind of got, I went back in my history because I had talked to Zim a little bit about that in my last year at Hopkins about this idea of using Freddy's style defense, but sliding early, going quickly. And, we didn't need to do it. He didn't really believe it was a great idea. So, he was right. We didn't need to do it. But so my first 2 years at Princeton, we tried to do what we did at Hopkins. We couldn't do it. So I said to myself, we got to do something different. This is crazy. And so what I did was I went back in my memory and thought about this idea of double teaming guys from behind and rotating in, but keeping in mind the lessons Freddy had taught me about bad angles and pushing people down the side and stuff. And so we kind of combined those two things. So we started out with, turning our hips and driving guys down the side, and then sliding early, pushing out adjacent, making teams rotate the ball if they wanted to do it quickly. And, probably the biggest mistake I ever made in my life in front of 2,000 coaches at the convention was in 1997, I gave it all away. And I'll never forget, Mike Messier, the great coach from West Genesee in New York, said to me at the end of it, he goes, "What'd you do that for? You shouldn't have told them." And he was probably right. But hence and it's gone away. Although I did allude to that funny story not too long ago where the guy on Twitter said he can't even coach his own defense anymore. So we've had to adjust. We make changes. And what I always tell people in lacrosse, I'm sure it's in business too, is, if you think you have a new idea, try to enjoy it, but it probably was a new idea 30 years ago. And if you think you have an old idea and it's getting tired, put it in your memory bank, because it'll be new 30 years from now, and it's kind of like, I always say, it's kind of like fashion, right? Hold on to your Chuck Taylors because they're going to come back in vogue someday,
Yeah, that's some tremendous advice right there. I am wondering how you aligned kind of taking all of these different practices, principles, tactics, and strategies from other coaches you were part of and meshed them with who you are as an individual. When do you feel like you really hit your stride there?
I think it was sometimes, like everything in life, sometimes it's out of necessity. The quote I've been using a lot, even though young people like yourself won't know who this is, but you want to Google Yogi Berra. He has some of the greatest sayings ever. And I've been using this a lot to young coaches who have been asking my advice. And it was, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And then what I meant by that is changing jobs, but also changing strategies, listening to the Matt Browns and David Metzbauers of the world and saying, you got to do this, but also by necessity, when at Great Neck South, all the way back to the mid 70s, we weren't very good, but we put in a zone defense and we worked on simple things that could help, a group of kind of 13 kids beat Manhasset one time and Cold Spring Harbor one time. And so I think out of necessity of the soccer at Hopkins, necessity of, being outmanned, certainly the national championship in our first one in 1992, it was one that nobody could have predicted. And it was our first Final Four, and they beat Hopkins in the semifinals, and we beat Carolina actually in the semifinals. It's in a crazy game because we were basically holding the ball back then, and we couldn't do it against Carolina. But thankfully, we outscored them 16-14. It was 110 degrees on the field at Franklin Field. And so the next day when you practice on Sunday, I remember walking out on the field. It was still hot. Nobody wanted to practice. We walked out on the field, and my friend Rick Beardsley, who I like a lot now, we laugh about this because he won his championships and he was a great, great player. He was laying in the middle of the field getting a suntan when our team was walking out for practice. And I said, maybe we have a chance at this. And so we started out, and we went up 7-0 on Syracuse. And they scored 2 goals in the last couple of minutes of the half. We were up 7-2 at halftime, and I can tell you, the looks in the eyes of our guys was one of bewilderment and surprise, And so they came back, of course, and we won it in that great Andy Moe goal in the third overtime or second overtime at Franklin Field. But once you get something like that happen to you, and then 4 of the 6 championships at Princeton were all overtime wins, you kind of get this feeling that you're blessed, number one. You're supported so much by the people around you, number two. But also, maybe you know a thing or two.
Yeah, can you hit more on that? I think that's one of those important moments where you were saying no one could have predicted this, but then all of a sudden you start to realize, you know what, I might be pretty good at this.
Yeah, and I've never tried to believe that. I'm always doubting myself. I really believe that there's when you look back on this stuff and people say things nice about you, you kind of say, well, why me? I'm nothing special. I'm not very smart. I'm not, I'm blessed. I mean, I have great faith, and I think that's helped me through a lot. But just a quick story. Back in 2002, when I was inducted into the Lacrosse Hall of Fame, I had come across a quote that I kind of thought was pretty cool. I was trying to think of what I was going to say, and the quote was, "Judge your success by what you had to give up in order to achieve it." And I changed one word in it, and I made it, "Judge your success by what others had to do in order for you to achieve it." And I think when you think of your family and your wife and your children, when you're a coach, our volunteer coach, Eric Adamson, we were talking yesterday about this. I'm giving him marital advice, like, before you get into this, make sure that she understands this is not your normal profession. When you lose a lacrosse game, it's like my wife Helen gives me 48 hours. And at 48 hours, said, "All right, stop being a baby. Let's go. We got a game. We got another game coming up." And so you're supported by family. You're supported by the people you're working for. You're supported by your players that will do anything for you. I remember Kevin Lowe, the great attackman. Somebody asked him, "What's it like to play for this wild man?" And he's always yelling at the refs and stuff. And Kevin said, "He does that for us." And when you feel like a kid gets that, then you feel like maybe you're doing something the right way, or at least the way you're coaching that group of young men is resonating with them to a point. Now, they may be out on Saturday night, laughing at you. I remember when I recruited Trevor back then, he was in a class of 2001, so he was high school 97, and back then, we recruited seniors, right? I mean, it was the summer, you got a top 205, and then you see the guys and you call them up about 5 times, you bring them in for a visit, and then they decide where they're going to go, right? That's how it was. And we used to use this phone in my house that was, Princeton paid for it, so I didn't use the phone at all, but only to make recruiting calls. So one night the phone rings and I go, "Nobody has this number. What is this?" And so I said hello, and it's not like today of all these spam calls and everything. It's usually a wrong number. So I go hello, and he goes, "Is this Coach Tierney?" I go, "Yeah." And I said, "Who's this?" He goes, "It's Trevor Tierney." And I go, "Trev, what are you doing? Like, you don't call this phone." And he goes, "I'm downstairs, and I wanted to let you know I want to come to Princeton." And it was so cool. Such a great, I still got to get the chills over it. It's such a cool moment. But then I quickly regrouped myself and said, "Okay, I got one question for you. You come to Princeton, you're out on a Saturday night with the boys, and somebody says, 'Your father's an asshole.' What are you going to say?" I'm leaving another word out. I don't even know if you can use that word. He said, within seconds, he said, "I'm going to say, I've lived with that asshole for 18 years, and you're absolutely correct." And so I knew he was ready. I knew he could handle it. So I think with all these things, all these experiences, you just I pray to be humble. I quickly try to. I have a saying that coaches lose games and players win them. So there's never been a day where I felt like, my impact on this made us win. No, the players played great. I feel like my assistant coaches have won games. I feel like in our quarterfinal in 2011, when Matt Brown came up with an amazing game plan we playing Hopkins at Hofstra in the quarterfinals, and maybe one of the best games we ever played here. Just came up with a game plan that was phenomenal. I think he won that game, but even he would say, because he feels the same as I do, that no, the kids played great. Cam Flint had 5 goals, or whatever it might have been. And, so I think as long as you can stay humble and remember that, you're this close from being on that other side. I always tell people about my last high school coaching experience. I was coaching the girls varsity basketball team at Levittown before I went up to RIT in January. And we pulled up to Westbury High School, and we get out of the bus, and we scored the first basket. And I'm like, all right, and they pressed us from that point on till we got back on the bus. We scored the first basket and the last basket and lost 72-4.
Get out.
So I remember how quickly, you can be humbled, and it can happen. It can happen at any time. So I try my best to let the kids enjoy the victories and let the coaches suffer with the failures.
Coach, I absolutely love these stories. I know we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes. I do want to hit on, though, getting to the top is almost impossible. Staying there is even harder. And I'm just curious how you were able to do that, to continue to stay on top, to win those championships when you have college-age players that are returning and keeping their egos in check.
The key is what I said before, Sean, is those other ones don't matter. It's all because what you have to remember is when you walk away into the sunset, people can talk about your 7 championships or whatever. I played on a national championship team when I was a senior in college. It was at Cortland's Division III. I was on an indoor championship. I was able to coach the world championships, and all those things I'm very proud of. But that's for the future. That's for others to talk about. Because if I rode on that experience, then the kids I'm coaching today would be cheated, because that's not their experience. Their experience is right now. And if you say to yourself, well, I've won 7, we don't need to work hard in the office today. We've won 7, or Matt Brown's won 1, and he's won 4 Minto championships, which are the most important thing to young Canadian kids. Let's just take the day off. Let's not put into this what we put into it to win those championships. You're cheating those kids. And some of them come because of that hope that they can be a part of something like that. And so I could never go to sleep thinking that I didn't give the kids 100% of my effort. And look, it's hard to win national championships. Like you said, there's great coaches out there. There's so many great players. There's amazing schools. And it's not just 5 or 6 schools winning them anymore. But if you don't give it that effort, then you should walk off to the sunset. People say, like, why do you keep doing this? And I say, I'll always have a rule, and it's 2 days in the year that I mark myself. Number 1 is the day the freshmen come in. Do I get excited about that and seeing their families and promising them about an experience? And then the first game of the season, do I still have those butterflies? Do I still have those juices flowing? And if the answer to those 2 questions are yes, then I feel like we're doing our job. And I have my days. We all have our lazy days or whatever, but I surround myself with people that won't accept that, and especially Matt Brown, who will not accept a lazy day. And so that's what keeps me going as well.
I love it, that day one mentality. Yeah, you've been a tremendous cultivator of talent throughout your years. So surrounding yourself with those people for your down days is certainly going to be helpful. If you were starting out again today as a coach, are there things you wish you had spent more time on earlier?
I think I've been a kind of a team planning guy. I think that comes. I think one thing I really, as I went through this career of trying to be a football coach, in football, you make a coaching decision every 15 seconds, especially an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator, right? So it's in your hands. It's bang, we're going to run a play. We're going to throw a pass. We're going to run a sweep. We're going to punt the ball. We're going to whatever. And I think if I tried to coach lacrosse that way, I still try to coach it that way, but now with Brownie and Metzi, we were allowed to kind of, as I said earlier, prepare. We're more of a preparation coaches now than game day coaches, because if you prepare them right, they're gonna take the game day and run with it. You still call your timeouts and all that other stuff, but so I think that's been the change. I wish I had gotten to a little bit earlier with concentrating on, this COVID thing has demanded that we concentrate more on individual skills. We did 5 weeks of 10-person cohorts, and I've never seen improvement in young men individually like I have here at Denver in the last 5 or 6 weeks. Now we're able to go to 25 persons, so we can do a little bit of half field 6-on-6. But I tell you, if I had to do it all over again in college, I would do what we did this year, which is spend 3, 4, 5 weeks in small groups doing individual work. And I think it's going to pay off in the end.
That's incredible, all these years, and it comes down to something you're learning in these past few months. I love
Absolutely.
that. Coach, I've got 3 quick ones. I've literally been dying my whole life to ask you these questions. So what's the greatest play you've ever seen on the field?
The greatest what?
Play.
Wow, as you know, I've been I've been blessed, but I think when you talk greatest, you can talk about greatest with the impact on a result, which would certainly be some of those, those overtime goals by Kevin Lowe, Jesse Hubbard, BJ Prager, all those guys, and then and certainly West Berg in the semifinals against Notre Dame. So those were great in that they were result oriented. When you talk about just great plays, maybe because it's fresh in my memory, but we lost this game to Loyola in the quarterfinals, and Mark Matthews to put us within 1. Mark Matthews made a catch. Somebody chucked the ball down to him, made a one-hand catch, turned and stuck the ball from about 18 yards. It was pretty. I'm trying to think if there was anything that was close to that, and I'm sure there were, but that one sticks out. But there are memorable plays like the greatest one in my mind was again, selfishly and family wise, was we're losing to Virginia in front of 40,000 people in 2000 in the semifinals, and BJ had gotten hurt that year, so my son Brendan was starting on attack, and people were just relentless behind me. Your son's only playing because he's your son, and your son's small and slow, and he stinks, and all this stuff. And Brendan ended up scoring the winning goal against Virginia. And I can tell you, my youngest daughter, Brian, took it into her own hands to turn around in the stands and start screaming at him and telling them that that was her brother, and he was pretty good now, wasn't he, and stuff like that. So, from a personal great play, all those great saves that Trevor made, the one against Syracuse that was in Sports Illustrated, all those things were just phenomenal memories. But that play that Mark Matthews made, that'll never leave. That was just a phenomenal play, and we lost the game, interestingly enough.
Yeah, that Mark Matthews play, I rewinded that thing 10 times right when that happened. I couldn't believe what he just did. It was incredible. And it's funny you mentioned Trevor's save against Syracuse with 9 seconds left. I was watching the highlights of that before this call. I was just reliving it. And the play I relived with my best friend growing up the most in our backyard was Ryan Boyle to BJ Prager to win it in overtime. So these are all lasting impressions. So this is too cool for me. You actually answered the most memorable moment there with Brendan to win the game. Final one, though. If you could sit down with anyone dead or alive, not a family member or friend, that you could just spend the evening having an interview like this, who would it be?
Well, look, I at the risk of getting spiritual, certainly Jesus. I think I've had that the importance in my life, and his blessed mother, who I give great prayer to. But if we went back in time and talked to somebody here, I think it would be, my dad died when I was 23 years old, and never really got a chance to I got that last year, a chance to find out a lot about him. My dad people have heard this story before, but he was a beer truck driver, and he said things when I was young that I kind of brushed off, and then I realized when I was older that they were very poignant. And so I would love to revisit with Dad, but I've had the blessing of becoming friends with guys like Bill Belichick, who every time I talk to him, he just blows me away as a friend, and just people don't know that guy. So there's just a bunch of people that happened through my life that I'd love to just spend a little time with. But it's a great question, but it's also one that I know from a personal standpoint, I wouldn't be where I am without the blessings from above. That's for sure.
Yeah, you get to spend a little bit of time with those people. We can learn a great deal. That's largely what this show is for, and that's why I feel so fortunate. I'll toot your horn again. Once again, I think you're the greatest coach of all time. The amount of impact you've had on me that you would never even know about, and helping me become just a man, a father, has been pretty tremendous. And then being around your kids, seeing how you developed them into people, it's pretty remarkable. So, Coach Bill Tierney, this was just such an honor for me. So thank you for joining us on What Got You There.
Thank you, Sean. It's been my honor.
What got you there with Sean DeLaney? 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 What got you there with Sean DeLaney?